Every morning began the same way for the person who lived at the small corner apartment near the old marketplace. The building wasn't special, and neither was the room they stayed in. It had a thin balcony, a creaking door, and a window that sometimes whistled when the wind passed through. Still, it was home. And home was enough, even when life felt heavy. This person lived a life that many people walk through, quietly waking up early, working long hours and returning tired but hopeful that tomorrow would be easier. They didn't complain. They didn't talk much about their struggles. Even when things were difficult, they simply took a deep breath and kept moving. What no one could see was how much they carried inside. Bills that seemed to grow faster than the paycheck. Groceries that didn't last as long as they used to. A feeling of loneliness when the days felt too long and the nights too quiet. They had friends, but everyone around them had their own lives, their own worries. So they learned to stay silent, believing that their problems were small compared to what others may be going through, even at work. They pretended everything was fine. Their coworkers greeted them every morning, smiling, assuming they were doing well. They responded with the same small smile, not wanting to burden anyone with the truth. People saw their strength, but they didn't know that sometimes it took every bit of energy just to get through the day. But life has its own way of placing small miracles in the path of tired hearts. And that was when the quiet help began. The first time it happened, it was so small that they almost didn't notice. They came home one evening carrying a heavy bag of groceries that had cost more than they planned. Their shoulders ached, and they sighed as they climbed the stairs. When they reached their door, they found a small packet placed neatly on the floor. Inside was a set of fresh vegetables, just enough for a few meals. At first, they thought a neighbor had left it by mistake. They even asked the person living next door, but the neighbor looked confused and said the packet wasn't theirs. The person shrugged and took the vegetables inside. They cooked a quiet dinner that night, grateful but unsure of what to think. The next morning, something similar happened. They woke up to a soft knock at the door. When they opened it, no one was there, but a small container of warm bread was left on the floor. Fresh, soft, and wrapped in a cloth as if someone didn't want it to lose its warmth. They stepped out into the hallway, looking left and right, but it was empty. Whoever had left it was already gone. They took the bread inside, sat at the little table near the window, and ate slowly, thinking about the mystery. Someone was helping them. Someone who didn't want to be seen or thanked. Someone who cared enough to make sure they didn't start the day hungry. It made them feel something they hadn't felt in a long time. Days passed, and more small things continued happening. A bill they had forgotten to pay was suddenly marked as cleared. A broken light inside their room, which had been blinking for weeks, suddenly shone brightly one day when they came home. The loose balcony railing, which they planned to fix but couldn't afford, was suddenly tightened and safer. Each time they looked around, wondering who would do something like that. They asked a few neighbors casually, but no one admitted anything. And since the acts were harmless and helpful, they didn't report them. Something inside their heart told them that whoever was doing these things meant no harm, only care. They started to look forward to coming home every day. Not because they expected something, but because they felt less alone knowing that someone out there was watching over them, even from afar. Still, they couldn't stop wondering why. Why would someone help them so quietly and so gently? They weren't wealthy. They weren't famous. They didn't have influence or power. They were just an ordinary person trying to make it through life, but maybe, they thought, someone saw something in them that they didn't see in themselves. Maybe someone saw their silent strength and wanted to support it. Or maybe someone noticed how they always helped others without expecting anything in return. One evening, the person stood on their small balcony, watching the sunset behind the old marketplace. The sky was painted in soft orange and pink lines. The wind brushed lightly against their face, carrying the smell of fresh bread from the street bakery below. As they leaned on the railing, now strong and repaired, they felt something warm in their chest. It was comfort. Someone cared. Someone noticed their struggle even when they tried to hide it. Someone believed they deserved kindness even when they didn't ask for it. That night, while preparing a simple dinner, they thought back to the little moments of help. The vegetables, the warm bread, the fixed light, the cleared bill. They realized something important. These weren't grand acts. These were gentle actions, quiet gestures, little reminders that kindness doesn't need to be loud to be powerful. The next morning, something new happened. As they stepped out of their apartment to leave for work, they noticed a small note stuck to their door. The handwriting was simple but careful. Just 4 words, "You're not alone anymore." They stood there for a long moment, reading the note again and again. There was no name, no hint, no explanation. But the message touched them more deeply than they expected. They slipped the note into their pocket, feeling the warmth of those words carry them through the day. For the first time in a long time, they walked with lighter steps. They smiled without forcing it. Even work felt less tiring. At lunchtime, they sat alone at the small break table and pulled out the note again. They touched the edges softly, thinking about the mystery. Was it someone from the building? Someone from work? Someone passing by who noticed their quiet struggles? They didn't know, but deep inside it didn't matter. What mattered was the feeling that someone cared enough to help without expecting anything in return. Over the next few days, the person continued receiving small, thoughtful gestures. A repaired zipper on their old jacket. A little plant left outside their door, a green plant with tiny leaves, something that made the apartment feel brighter. A soft scarf placed neatly in a bag during a cold morning. Every act carried warmth. Every act carried love. Not loud, not obvious, not dramatic, but real. One night, as they sat holding the small plant in their hands, they whispered to themselves, "Whoever you are, thank you." They didn't say it loudly. They didn't expect anyone to hear it. But it felt good just to let the words exist. They still didn't know who was helping them. But what they did know was that they were no longer moving through life completely alone. There was a kindness in the world that reached them even when they were silently hurting. A kindness that asked for nothing, expected nothing, and quietly filled the empty spaces of their days. It was as if someone had been watching over them, not in a strange or worrying way, but in a caring, gentle way. Like someone who understood what it felt like to struggle quietly. Someone who knew how heavy life could feel when you carry things alone. And so, the story of their days began to change, not because their problems vanished, not because everything suddenly got easy, but because one silent helper chose to be a soft light in their darkest moments. A new chapter of their life was unfolding, even if they didn't know it yet. A chapter shaped by the quiet, loving kindness of someone who remained unseen, someone who helped them every day. Quietly, silently, lovingly. He stood outside the small house the next morning, unsure if he should knock or simply wait. The sky was a soft gray, the air cool enough to make his breath visible. He had not slept well. His mind kept replaying the quiet discoveries of the past few weeks, the food that appeared on the table, the fixed door hinge, the mended shoes, the little acts of care that he had thought were miracles. And now, after finally learning who was behind them, he felt a strange mix of gratitude, confusion, and guilt. He lifted his hand to knock, then dropped it. He tried again, failed again. Somehow, knocking on this door felt harder than anything he had done in a long time. Finally, when he had gathered a little courage, the door opened on its own. The same gentle figure stood there, calm as always, wiping their hands with a small cloth as if they had expected him. "You came," the figure said softly. He nodded, unsure of what to say first. The person stepped aside and let him enter. The house was simple but peaceful, filled with the quiet scent of tea. Everything seemed warm, so different from the coldness he had carried inside. Himself for years, he sat down slowly at the small wooden table. The figure poured him a cup of warm tea without asking. It was an old habit of theirs, he suspected. They always knew what someone needed before the person even spoke. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. Then he finally found his voice. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" His words came out softer than he expected. The figure smiled, but it was not a smile of pride. It was a gentle one, touched with kindness. "You already had so much on your mind," they said. "My help was never meant to be noticed. It was meant to lighten your load, not add more questions to it. But I should have known, he insisted quietly. All those days, all those things you did, why didn't you at least let me thank you? Because you were tired, they replied. You were trying to take care of everything alone. Some battles are easier to fight when someone helps quietly from the shadows. He breathed in deeply, then slowly let it out. For years he had carried the weight of family responsibilities on his shoulders, convincing himself he had nobody. He had worked late hours, skipped meals, and ignored his own exhaustion. He had believed that life had placed him in a corner, that help would never arrive. But now, sitting here, he realized that help had been arriving every single day, just without noise, without demands, without seeking recognition. I don't understand how you knew what we needed, he whispered. You always knew before I even said anything. I watched, the figure said simply. Not in a strange way. Just, I paid attention. When someone is hurting silently, their pain leaves small signs. And sometimes those signs are louder than words. He looked down at his hands. They were trembling slightly. He clenched them together to steady himself. You saved us, he said. You really did? The figure shook their head. You saved yourself. You worked so hard. You sacrificed so much. I only tried to fill the small gaps. But those gaps were everything, he argued quietly. Those gaps were the difference between giving up and holding on. Silence settled between them again, but this time it felt warm, not heavy. Finally the figure spoke again, almost hesitantly. You were never alone. You just didn't see the ones who cared because your days were too full of survival. Sometimes when a person is drowning, they don't notice who swims beside them. He felt something tighten in his chest. Not pain, something else, something softer. And now? He asked. Now that I know, does anything change? That depends on you, the figure said. If knowing makes you feel stronger, then good. If it makes you feel uncomfortable, then we can pretend nothing was revealed. I never wanted you to feel like you owed me anything. I do owe you, he replied instantly. More than I can ever explain. The figure shook their head again. You owe me nothing. Real help is never given to create a debt. It is given because someone sees a struggle and decides they can ease it. He stared at the cup of tea in his hands. The steam rose gently, fading into the air. He thought back to the many mornings when he had felt too weak to continue, when the world felt too heavy. Those were the mornings something small had appeared: fresh bread, a replaced light bulb, a small envelope with enough money to cover a bill. He had believed it was luck. He had believed that life had moments of mercy. But all along it had been a person, a real human, quietly watching, quietly caring. After a moment, he looked back up at them. Why me? He asked. Why help me? Why help my family? The figure's eyes softened in a way words could not describe. Because I saw myself in you, they said. Years ago I struggled too. I had no one. I promised myself that if one day I became strong, I would help someone who reminded me of what I had once been. He swallowed hard. There was something so pure in those words that it almost hurt. And you became strong, he whispered. I became wiser, they replied gently. Strength fades, but wisdom stays. He felt his breath catch in his throat. He had thought of this person as quiet, simple, unremarkable. But now he realized they were the strongest person he had ever met, not because of muscles or power, but because of their heart. He had lived so long believing that the world only cared when it was convenient. But here was proof that kindness still existed, even if it came wrapped in silence. He finally found the courage to speak what he had been holding inside. I want to help others the way you helped me, he said. I want to pass it forward. The figure leaned back slightly, a glimmer of pride in their eyes. Then my work is done, they said softly. What do you mean? I never wanted to help you forever, they explained. I only wanted to help until you found your strength again. And you have. Look at you now. You stand taller. You breathe easier. You speak without fear. That was all I ever hoped to give. He didn't know what to say to that. His voice felt trapped in his chest. The figure stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the morning light was slowly brightening the world. Children walked to school. A neighbor watered plants. Life moved in gentle rhythms, unaware of the quiet conversation happening in this small house. Then the figure turned back to him. "People like you," they said, "when they find their strength, they shine. And when you shine, it lights the path for others. That is how the world slowly changes." He felt something warm spread through his chest. For the first time in a long while, he believed those words. He believed he could be light for someone else. He believed he could be the quiet help someone desperately needed. He stood up too. "I don't want this to be the end," he said. "I don't want you to disappear from my life." "I won't disappear," the figure said gently. "I just won't interfere anymore. But if life ever becomes too heavy again, you know where to find me." He nodded, touched by the honesty in their voice. He walked toward the door, feeling lighter, steadier. But before he stepped out, the figure called out softly, "One last thing," they said. "When you help someone one day, don't expect them to notice. Don't expect thanks. Don't expect anything. Do it quietly. Do it silently. Do it lovingly. That is the purest kind of care." He slowly nodded. "Someone help me quietly," he said. "I'll do the same." And with that promise, he stepped out of the house. The sky had cleared, and the sunlight touched his face like a new beginning. He walked home with a calm heart, feeling a strength he had not felt in years. From that day onward, he lived differently. He noticed small struggles in others. He listened more. He waited for moments where his quiet help could ease someone's burden. And whenever he helped, he did it in the same gentle way he had once received it, without noise, without reward, without seeking praise, because someone had once helped him every day, quietly, silently, lovingly, and now it was his turn to carry that light forward.